Welcome. The first thing I'd like to just mention is I feel a little, maybe humbled isn't the right word, but most of you have been in the diocese much longer than I have, and been associated with the Missionaries of the Precious Blood in some way much longer than I have. And so what I'm going to try to do is just kind of sketch out a historical path from the beginnings of the missionaries, and then I'll go into some of the stuff here in the diocese, and then talk a little bit about the contemporary situation in our congregation today. On your little handout, if you don't have a handout, they're floating around. I think I did 30. Anybody need one? John Shank had them. There's some web links there if you want to look at those, and then I'll reference the two items on the back. As you know, the Missionaries of the Precious Blood were founded by St. Gaspar del Bufalo in 1815. St. Gaspar was a Roman priest from the city of Rome, born in 1786. He was one of the very first Roman priests to be canonized a saint. That was in 1954. There's a great devotion in the city of Rome to him as a Roman priest. All the other Italian saints were always from other places, but the Roman priest, he was one of the first. He died in 1837. So those of you who know your history know that his life spanned the Napoleonic time period. So all the upheavals in Europe during the Napoleonic Wars, and that would have a great effect on his life. As I said, he founded the order in 1815. He was already a priest. He had already been a priest for a couple years, and he was very fervent about reaching out to the poor, the uneducated, the hungry. Even while he was what we would call a seminarian nowadays, and even before that, when he would have been like in the middle school years, he did all kinds of outreach to the people in his neighborhood. His father was a baker in one of the big palazzos, one of the big fancy palaces in downtown Rome. It's right across the street from the Gesù, the main Jesuit church. And so Gaspar would take food from his father's kitchen and give it to the poor people out the window. So he would steal from Dad to give it to the poor. He had a great, his mother had a great devotion to St. Francis Xavier. St. Francis Xavier, the great Jesuit missionary. When Gaspar was a child, he had an eye ailment, and she took him to the church of San Ignacio, which is in that neighborhood, another big, beautiful church, and prayed at the tomb of Francis Xavier, and he was cured of his eye ailment. And so from that day forward, she had this great devotion to Francis Xavier, which rubbed off on her son. Just as Francis Xavier was a great missionary, a Jesuit missionary who went to India and to the Orient, so Gaspar wanted to follow in his footsteps. Gaspar worked with other friends of his who were priests, and they had this small group. Today we might call it something like the Knights of Columbus, kind of a fraternal group who did outreach in that neighborhood of Rome, the Montanara area of Rome, which is where he was kind of centered. And these priests, as they worked together in providing relief to the poor, education to the farmers as they would come into the market, they would educate the kids before they went back out to the country, they decided that they wanted to create a community of priests. These are all diocesan priests, but they wanted to live together and focus all of their energies on giving missions. I know here at St. Augustine's there has been parish missions given here before. I don't know when the last one was. A long time ago. But what Gaspar would do with these missions, there'd be, 2 or 3 of the priests would go out into one of these small towns in the hills and would be there for 2 weeks. And there'd be all kinds of preaching, there'd be special celebrations, there'd be, confessions, there'd be all kinds of processions through the streets with statues, kind of a Catholic revival. Imagine what a Baptist revival would be. It's like a Catholic revival. there were all kinds of events that would happen during these missions. And what he would do is, once the mission was over, they had set up different groups that would continue to work in the town. So there'd be a ladies group, let's say like the Legion of Mary, we might call it today, and there'd be a men's group that would then continue the work of the mission throughout the next couple months. So it wasn't like Gasper would go into a small town, preach for a weekend, and leave. They actually set up all kinds of groups to carry on the fruit of the mission. Now you might ask, well, why did they want to have this group of priests go around preaching missions? I mean, that seems kind of, if there's a parish priest there, why would you need to have people coming from the outside? Well, at the time, Rome in the Papal States, the central part of Italy, was recovering from the Napoleonic Wars. And so there was a great breakdown in the social order. Many priests had fled. Many priests, when they were told they had to swear an oath of allegiance to Napoleon, they did. Gasper was one of the ones who stayed faithful to the Pope. He did not swear an oath of allegiance to Napoleon. And so in this turmoil, it wasn't just in the church, but it was in the social order too. The governments were in upheaval. There was a very drastic rise in crime. Lots of young men, because they couldn't work, turned to a life of crime. So they're called brigands. They would live in the hills, come down and rob people, go back to the hills. It was a really bad time for the Papal States. One such story, this is after Gasper had founded the community. There was a small town south of Rome called Sannino, and it was such a hotbed of maybe what we would call them today would be domestic terrorists, such a hotbed of resistance in this town that the Pope had decided they were just going to level the town. They were going to, it's a hilltop town, they were going to take, cut bait and run. They were just going to get rid of it. Gasper persuaded the Pope to allow him to go and try to convert the town. And he was successful. It took a lot of work, but over the course of a year, he was able to get them to turn their weapons over and to return to kind of the normal course of events. And to this day, we still have a parish in Sannino. And to this day, he has a great following there as well. He is beloved. During our bicentennial year in 2015, there was an international group that came over to Rome, and one of the trips that we took was to Sannino. So just imagine those big tour buses, and you're going to these windy little roads into this town where cars can't go into the town because there's not enough room in the streets. Streets are only for walking. And here's, 100 of us get off the bus. The mayor is there to meet us. The police chief is there to meet us. Every dignitary you can imagine as they're giving this tour of Sannino, they still have a great devotion to Gasper. The other part of Gasper that I just want to touch on before moving forward is he had a great devotion to the precious blood. And that's why we're called the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. When Gasper was in prison for a number of years because he refused to give his oath of allegiance to Napoleon, so while he was in prison, he became connected with a priest by the name of Albertini, and Father Albertini had a great devotion to the precious blood. And Albertini kind of served as Gasper's spiritual director while he was in prison. The idea of the precious blood at that time was that what greater love can there be than for Jesus to shed his precious blood for us? And so Gasper really connected with that idea of that eternal love that Christ has for us, for all individuals. There was a group called the Pious Union of the Precious Blood, kind of a prayer group, and so Gasper became one of their central preachers. And so the two strains of Gasper's life that impact the community today is his outreach in terms of mission work and his precious blood spirituality. You combine those two things, and that's what you have in the Missionaries of the Precious Blood today. Gasper died in 1837. He died, anybody here been to Rome? I know Ed has. So he died, if you know where Teatro Marcello is, which is right at Piazza Venezia, near the Roman Forum. He died in a little apartment that was there. He had been ministering to victims of a cholera epidemic and caught cholera himself and ended up dying. So that was in 1837. If that's where the story would end, then we wouldn't be here today. At least Brother Tim and I wouldn't be here today. Something happened right after Gasper died, 1 year after Gasper died, that changed our congregation, well, forever. There was another person who had almost as much influence on the congregation as Gasper did. And that his name was Francis Desales Brunner. He is an interesting character. As you might know, today, in order to join a religious community, you have to go through an interview process, there's psychological testing, there's all kinds of interviews, those kind of things, just to make sure that the person coming into the community is sane, normal. And the joke is that if St. Francis would try to join the Franciscans today, they'd reject him. Because most saints, in some way or another, are a little off. They are. That's what makes them saints in many ways. Francis Desales Brunner is not a saint, but he would not be accepted into our formation program today. He wouldn't make it as a priest or a brother. Francis Desales Brunner was in 3 other communities before he came to the Precious Blood.
Ooh.
He was sent to a Benedictine abbey when he was about 11. Then he became a Trappist, and he also had connections with the Cistercians. So he kind of went from place to place to place. He came to Rome because his mother took a pilgrimage to Rome, and he accompanied her. And so while he's there, he meets this small group of Roman priests known as the Congregation of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. And he kind of becomes interested in their life and in their work, and so he decides he wants to join them. So he went through a very rigorous month-long formation process, and then he was told to go to Switzerland and start the community up there. So he didn't have a lot of training in the community. Now at the time, the missionaries would have only numbered maybe about 20 at most. So it was a very small order. So Francis Desales Brunner goes back to Switzerland with his mom, and up there he starts to invite young men, and his mother starts to invite young women to live with them in this Castle Lowenberg, and they begin the beginnings of a religious community there. Now the mother, Maria Anna Brunner, became the foundress of, does anybody know? Yeah, the Sisters of the Precious Blood out of Dayton, Ohio. And so that's the connection there between the two orders. So Brunner goes back to Germany and Switzerland, collects different priests and some seminarians, and then decides he's going to go to the U.S. There was a request from the Archbishop of Cincinnati, Purcell at the time, I believe, that we needed German-speaking priests in Ohio. Well, that's one thing that Brunner could do, he could speak German. And so him, and along with, I think it was maybe 8 or 9 others, came over and landed, either they landed in New Orleans on December 31st, or they landed in Cincinnati on December 31st. I think it was Cincinnati. On December 31st, 1843. So mind you, that's what, 5 years after he entered the community, he was already starting a foreign mission. So he was doing exactly what Gasper had wanted to do at the very beginning, that is to go out into the foreign mission lands. Brunner was, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in Roman numeral 2, Brunner was a very strict person. He had strands of what we call Jansenism, which is a very strict spirituality. You know the movies or the stories of monks, you know, whipping themselves. That's a Jansenistic tendency to, you know, anything that gives you pleasure, you should get rid of, and that's really it's not quite that stark. But he was a very rigorous man. Maybe that's the better word. Very rigorous when it came to his own prayer life and community life as well. Brunner comes over and he lands up near where Ed is from, up near Bellevue, Ohio, which is kind of an hour and a half from Cleveland, in the Sandusky area up there. And that was our first settlement in Peru, Ohio, which is now near Norwalk. We still have a big shrine there. The Sorrowful Mother Shrine is right in that area. And from there, they ministered to German immigrants, German farmers. From Peru, that just south of Cleveland area, quickly we spread over to Mercer County, Ohio, which is right across the border from Muncie into Ohio. So that's where St. Charles, our seminary is, our retirement home. We have a lot of parishes in that area. Pat, you know that area well. Salina, Ohio, if you know that city and the big lake there. So that's where we kind of got centered. By the time of Francis Desales Brunner's death, there were 388 Sisters of the Precious Blood, 70 brothers, and 25 priests. You think about those numbers. 388 sisters, 70 brothers, 25 priests. That's a lot in just a short 20 years roundabout. Now, most of them all came from Europe. That number, most of them all came from Europe. Francis Desales would go back to Europe each year and bring back another group. He ended up dying in Europe. He died on his way to go to what we call a general chapter in Rome, which is a meeting of the superiors. And he died in Liechtenstein. So he's buried in Schellenberg, Liechtenstein, where we have a parish. So that was the end of Francis Desales Brunner. If you're interested, in, I think it's online, it should be a PDF. Dominic Gerlach, Father Gerlach, you guys remember him, has a short little pamphlet, maybe 20 pages, on the history of the American province of the CPPS that does a lot with Francis Desales Brunner. Now, what Brunner did was something drastically different than what Gasper did. Saint Gasper in Italy had a rule that the community would not take parishes. There were the Italian members of our community never staffed parishes during the time of Saint Gasper. Everything had to be committed to doing these missions. And so Gasper had the idea that you can't be stable in one spot and then, you know, go out to all these different missions. So all of these priests had to renounce any sort of assignment to a parish. Full concentration on giving all of these missions and traveling around. When Brunner came here, that model really doesn't work when you're in the middle of the forest in Ohio, where the one thing that the church needs are parishes. Because there were no parishes here, or they were far, between each other. So what Francis Desales Brunner did was, kind of following a more monastic style, he founded what we would call, you could use the word convents or mission houses, either one. He founded about 10 of these mission houses around Mercer County, Jay County, Indiana, Putnam County, Ohio, which is Ottawa, Glandorf, just above Lima, if you know where Lima is. So these different convents were all named Mary something. So you had Maria Stein, which is Mary of the Rock, Maria Steg, which was Mary of the Forest, which is where the shrine is in Bellevue. You had Mary's Home, you had Mary's Flight into Egypt, you had Himmelgarten, but I'm not sure how that one got into a Mary name. It just means heavenly garden. Is that right, Don?
That's it.
Yeah. So these convents or these mission houses, don't think of it as a single house. They were compounds. So you had multiple buildings. So you had one big building for the sisters. You had a very small building for the priests, and you had a very smaller building for the brothers. That's kind of how it worked. Then you have your farm, you have your barn. They were farms. So you had working farms, and at these mission houses, young girls would come and be taught by the sisters. The priest would go out from there to have masses at different locations. So they would go out on a Saturday and come back on a Sunday. They might go 30 miles to the next town to have masses there because there is no resident priest, and then they would come back. So that's kind of how they operated in these mission houses. What's interesting about the way Brunner set this up is, who do you think was in charge? Now, by the way, I forgot to ask. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and ask. You know, so his mother's dead. She's in Switzerland, buried. Francis Desales is dead. He's in Liechtenstein, buried. But these mission houses, where you had priests, brothers, and sisters all living, not in the same buildings, but who was in charge? The sisters. The sisters controlled the money. The sisters were in charge of the money. The sisters were in charge of the gardening. The sisters were in charge of the education. The brothers did the heavy farming, and the priests went out and had masses. The other interesting thing about the way Brunner set this up is, it wasn't like the sisters were in a different community. The sisters and the brothers and the priests were all in one community. So it wasn't like it is now, where there's the missionaries of the precious blood and the sisters of the precious blood. At that time, it was sister, brothers, priest all together. That ended in 1887 when the Vatican ruled that we could no longer have mixed sex orders. So you had to have separate orders for the men and for the women. And so we separated in 1887, and we divided up the property, divided up the money, and the Sisters of the Precious Blood had their mother house at Maria Stein, which is in Mercer County, and then they eventually moved down to Dayton, Ohio, where Salem Heights, their mother house, is now. The priests and the brothers kept St. Charles, where our seminary is, and that's about it. So now we come to the diocese. So that's all kind of the background to what was going on with the congregation. We came to, the Missionaries of Precious Blood came to the diocese, or the geographic area that is now the diocese. At the time, the diocese did not exist. In 1884, there's a little tiny town called Trinity. And it's on
67.
67? Yeah. Right across the border from Ohio. It is the last parish in the diocese before you hit Ohio. At that location in Trinity, Father Brunner founded Mary's Home, one of these mission houses. It's near Bryant, if you know where Bryant, Indiana is. So in 1854, they founded this mission house. From that mission house, priests went to Portland to have Mass. They went to other places in Ohio to have Mass, and they went to other towns to the east of Jay County to have Masses as well. That mission house lasted until 1918. I believe if you go there today, there are still foundations of the buildings that you can see on the parish grounds. It's Holy Trinity Parish now. So I explained to you how the mission houses work. In terms of parishes, if you turn over to the back side, at the top you have the mission statement of the Cincinnati Province of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood, just for your own information. But then you see there, these are all the parishes. I've had our archivist go through the archives. These are all of the parishes where we've served in some significant capacity. There are dozens of other parishes in the diocese that we had maybe somebody there covering for 9 months, or we had an associate there for 1 year. But these are all the ones where we had a significant presence at. And if you just take a look at that, that's quite a list. So you see there are only 2 that we currently still staff. Holy Trinity, where Father Kinault is pastor. Those of you who would know Father Kin, he was pastor here. Probably what, early 90s? Sounds right?
Mid-80s. Yeah.
Mid-80s. And then you have obviously St. Augustine, where Father Don is pastor here. A couple things just to note. One, the parishes in Winnemac and Pulaski, we just recently gave those over a couple years ago back to the diocese. Father John Minsick would have been the last, I believe, at St. Peter, and Father Ron Schimmel at Pulaski. And then, of course, at Francisville and Madeiryville, Father Paul White was staffing that for many years in his retirement. Just a couple little notes on a couple of these. You notice about 2/3 of the way down, St. Joseph Hospital in Logansport. So we had a chaplain at that hospital, and that eventually became a state hospital. Remember, a state hospital for the mentally incapacitated. It's my understanding that one of our former provincials, Father Charles Bricker, was the last chaplain there, and he died in a horrible car wreck in Logansport. And that's where he died there. So you see there, he staffed that hospital from 1914 to 21, and then again 30 years from 53 to 83. The other 2 other items I want to point out is you see St. Paul in Marion from 1944 to 1957. We did not have we weren't the pastor there, but we sent associates there. There was, hard to believe, there was a time in our community's history where we had too many priests, and we did not know what to do with it. So we had dozens, over the years, dozens of priests that were sent out as associates to diocesan parishes. I think where Brother Tim grew up in Piqua had precious blood priests as associates, but not as the pastor. The world has changed. Now we are asking the diocese to give us an associate so we can keep in some places. But that was what we did. I mean, we had, in 1965, there were approximately 500 precious blood priests in the United States of America. That's priest, does not include brothers. Probably add another 75 to 80 brothers, I'd imagine. So we had this tradition of the bishop would ask, hey, do you have somebody? And we would send people. That's kind of a common mantra throughout our history is we would respond to the needs of the bishop. Where do you want us to go? If he had a parish that really needed help, we would go. An extremely poor parish, we would go. A parish that has the pastors leaving and they can't send somebody for another year, we would go. We felt that was part of our charism. The other one I want to point out is at the very bottom, St. Mary's in Anderson. Father Cornelius Fenton, also known as Rod Fenton, was an associate there back between 1949 and 52. He was a great golfer. Everyone knows Bishop Higgy, right? Okay. So when Bishop Higgy would come out to the college for any of the events, St. Gaspar Day, Feast of the Precious Blood, one of the things he would always tell is a little story about how he got his vocation. Father Rod Fenton was the associate at his home parish, and he encouraged Bishop Higgy to go to the seminary. And so to this day, Higgy will say his vocation is due to Father Fenton, a missionary of the Precious Blood. And of course, our response often is, why didn't you join us? But to this day, I get a Christmas card from from Bishop Higgy each year, and he'll often have a little note about Father Fenton. And actually, for my ordination here at the college, back in 2004, Father Fenton came over from Cartagena, and so was able to see Bishop Higgy again, which was awesome. The other item that actually Ed brought up before we even started, he wanted to make sure I was going to include it, is when Lafayette Central Catholic High School was begun in Lafayette, obviously, we provided, the Missionaries of the Precious Blood provided the staff.
Really?
We were the founding principal, and we provided the initial staff until they could hire lay people.
Wow.
And so Father Frank Kinney was the principal, and then who else did you say, Ed?
Dick Griever was.
Dick Griever.
Graver was there.
Yeah, so there were a number of our guys who staffed the high school there. That was not uncommon. We did that in California as well. In our Pacific province, actually even before the Pacific province existed, we staffed a diocesan high school in Santa Rosa, Cardinal Newman High School. Any questions about the parishes?
What was the biggest reason that most of them closed?
No, those aren't all closings. That's just either when we left and the diocese took over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those aren't, yeah.
And so what,
The only ones I can, St. Mary's in Dunkirk is closed. That's the only one on there that I see that's closed.
Okay.
Yeah. So we would go in for a while and then turn it over back to the diocese. Yeah.
so why did the Precious Blood not stay? Is it that they were just moving on to something else?
Moving on to something else, or it could be a half a dozen different things. Yeah. It could be that the bishop only wanted us there for a short time until they could get somebody there. There's always a give and take between a diocese and a religious order. A diocese is stable, is a geographical area. The bishop is responsible for the parishes that are there. Religious orders are non-geographically bound, and so we go different places, and so it's some of that. Yeah. Obviously, we can't talk about the Missionaries of the Precious Blood in the diocese without talking about St. Joseph's College. And just looking here, I've seen many of you at Mass at the college before. Judy and I were co-workers there, both teaching at the same time. Ed was at every basketball game. His brother Tim,
I worked there.
Mary Chesick and Dr. Chesick, Bob Shank. Am I missing somebody?
Bookstore.
Bookstore, Phyllis at the bookstore.
Carol Wood.
Carol Wood, Board of
Yeah.
Trustees.
Companions.
Companions, yeah, so there's connections to the college here, you know. I could give you the whole history of the college, but most of you, I think, know the whole history of the college. So a couple things I kind of want to just maybe highlight that are little facts I didn't know that I found when doing a little bit of reading, and also ways that the college, not the history of the college, ways the college impacted the diocese.
Oh,
Because I think that's kind of what we want to focus on. The organizational meeting for St. Joseph's College happened in 1889 at, anybody want to guess?
Drexel Hall?
Nope,
Fort Wayne.
nope, nope.
Here?
Trinity,
Oh.
Really?
the small little town of Trinity.
Yeah.
The first board, that's where they gathered to meet. The way the college came about was the Bishop of Fort Wayne, Joseph Dwanger, was a Precious Blood priest. He was the first U.S.-born member of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. He was also the first who was sent away for further studies. He actually did seminary work in Cincinnati, as opposed to, at the time, most religious orders just kind of educated internally. He became Bishop of Fort Wayne and was known as one of the fathers of the parochial school system. The Fort Wayne parish schools were a model at the time for the U.S. of what parish schools should be like. Bishop Dwanger wanted a college in his diocese, and of course the Lafayette Diocese was part of the Fort Wayne Diocese, wanted a college here to educate young men, seminarians and lay. Now, you have to remember back then what a college meant was about the age of 11 and 12 up. So don't think of it as a 18 to 22 baccalaureate degree, etc. It was a whole different setup. You're talking much more like a high school and junior college. John Groppe, Rosemary's husband, about 2 years ago did a nice essay on all the different permutations that the college has taken over the years. It was a high school, it was a junior college, it was a seminary only. It really didn't become a 4-year college until after World War II, an exclusively 4-year college. So the bishop, and that's why it's St. Joseph, because it's Joseph Dwanger was the bishop, and so they named it after him. So the bishop wanted a college here. The Benedictines turned him down twice. I believe the conventual Franciscans turned him down. There was a thought of building one in Crown Point. There was a thought of building one in Fowler. And then they got their hands on, there was an orphanage.
Yes.
And they got the hands on the orphanage property. And Bishop Dwanger was able to somehow convince the provincial director of the missionaries to start a college. We had never done that before. We had never done it in Europe. So it was a new adventure. A little tidbit that I learned was it was endowed originally by a tax that was put on every priest in the community. Every priest had to pay $100. And this is in 1889, so that's a lot of money. So every priest had to pay $100 to start the endowment at the college.
Interesting.
If you want a good history of the college, Father Gerlach's pictorial history, I mean, it takes you up through 1991, and then your own memory can take you from 91 forward.
Father Robbins.
How did the college impact the diocese? Now, maybe that's where we ought to spend a little bit of time. As I was reading through different materials, something that I learned was the college operated in much the same way as those mission houses that Brunner put up. The college, of course, as many of you guys know since you're from Rensselaer, had the farms, was self-sufficient, had the gardens, had the cows, had the chickens, had all that stuff. But also, the priest went out from the college to different parishes. There's even reports of, and this is in the 19-teens and 20s, the priest getting on the train on a Saturday, going to Chicago, having masses and coming back on Sunday. So they would go that far afield to take masses.
Even Wisconsin.
And Wisconsin, as Father Don says. So they were very busy. That was in addition to their teaching. And of course, at the time, you have to remember, there was no distinction between administration and teaching and everything else. You did everything. You were the disciplinarian, you were the infirmary person, you were everything. So you have the natural, the masses, all the priests would go out for masses. The very first Catholic school in Rensselaer was at the college.
The high school?
No, elementary school.
There was an elementary.
In the old orphan house,
Okay.
the sisters taught school for any Catholic families who would bring their children there.
Oh, that's right.
What year?
You're talking 1891, 92. So right at the very beginning of the college. You also have the Indian school across the street, and I'm not going to go into that too much again. There's research there that Father Gerlach did. So first Catholic school, I believe the first Catholic Mass, was at the college as opposed to St. Augustine's. St. Augustine's I don't think was formed yet.
Oh,
I'd have to double check that, but I think that's what I read. So you have the initial beginnings, or the beginnings of the Catholic life in the area was at the college. We also, maybe the first Mass wasn't there because St. Augustine's was 1888. I have to look that up. Other ways that the college impacted the life of the diocese. Well, a natural way was summer schools. If you went to a parochial school or a Catholic high school, you're going to be taught by nuns, right? How many of you guys went to Catholic schools? Okay. So you had nuns, even the nuns here, the Sisters of the Precious Blood of St. Augustine's.
right.
Almost none of them, especially in the 50s, none of them would have degrees when they started teaching. They would spend their summers going to school to get a degree while they were teaching. Even my dad tells stories, when he was graduating from high school as an 18-year-old, he had a teacher who was only 20. So the college provided summer school for sisters for many, many years. And I'm not talking about the music program. That's something separate. And so summer schools for sisters were, and the Sisters of the Precious Blood sent a huge number of sisters to Rensselaer during the summers. The other way that the college really impacted the diocese would be the summer school of music and liturgy, the Rensselaer program of music and liturgy, started by Father Hyman, Larry Hyman, those of you I'm sure remember him. And I didn't do too much digging on dates, but I believe he started it in about 63, 60, it was right before the Second Vatican Council, right during it. Rosemary, you guys would have just been coming here.
Became 62.
Yeah. So that program obviously impacted the diocese by training liturgical musicians, pastoral musicians, not only in the diocese but also around the country. And it became a nationally known program for church music and liturgy. John, did you ever do anything through the summer school?
Once.
It was designed as the summer school, as a person could work full-time and come for parts of the summer, and after 4 years or whatever, end up with a master's in pastoral music or liturgy. Now, since we have such a wealth of information with you guys, those of you who've been associated with the college, I have one other I want to add, and I'm just wondering if you guys have anything. How else have you seen the college contribute to the life of the diocese?
Well, St. Augustine had been blessed with the priests from the college to help with the masses. And we're blessed with Father Tim all the years that he taught CCD and Brother Tim. And
Could be father.
yeah, could be, that's for sure. But and help form our children and stuff, So
important.
yeah, very
So
important.
you have the Brother Tim coming here for decades
Oh,
doing
yes.
youth ministry. You had Father Costin coming here for masses. Different priests from the college who come to the parish.
Yeah,
ELM program.
That's the one I want to touch on, yeah. The college also gave retreats to diocesan youth. There were a couple of times, I know when I was a student in college, Brother Tim and I would work on retreats for high schoolers from Lafayette and around the diocese. They'd come to campus for like a Kairos for high schoolers. Mary, you were?
Well, I was going to say Rensselaer was so proud of St. Joe, and the college brought a lot of culture to our town, our community.
So a real resource that way.
Yeah.
The other significant way that the diocese, or the college contributed to the diocese, was at the very beginnings of the ecclesial lay ministry program. Dr. Nichols, John Nichols, was one of the co-founders along in the diocese of this program. So this is a program where we would train lay people, give them the theological background and the pastoral training, the ministerial training, so that they can get a certificate or even a degree in ministry. They would serve as DREs, youth ministers, pastoral associates of various kinds. Sister Catherine, who teaches here, does she still teach here?
She just
Retired. Sister Catherine, I had her in class when I was teaching in the program. And so we, as a college, provided the academics, and then the diocese provided the formation, the retreats, the spirituality side. So we would go down to Lafayette, to St. Elizabeth's, Kokomo, St. Joan of Arc, Holy Spirit and Geist, here in Rensselaer, Logansport. I know John Nichols one year was driving twice a week to Anderson, there and back each time, to provide the content for this program. I don't know the numbers, but it has to be over 200 lay ministers were trained here through the ELM program. And that was really a wonderful program, and that's a way that the college has really contributed back to the diocese over the decades. It would have started sometime in the early 90s, because it was already going when I was a student. It just started, and I want to say they might have concluded it or changed the way it's working maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. Any other questions on the college?
I think Des Ryan.
Yes.
I here remember him.
Yeah.
He served at a capacity for
Catholic Charities.
Catholic Charities.
Yeah, that's a good point. Des Ryan, who was a faculty member at St. Joe's, and of course a member here at St. Augustine's for a long time, decades, was the director of Catholic Charities / there was another kind of, he was involved in a lot of the social outreach in the diocese. He was also the ecumenical officer for a number of years. Yeah. There's so many people, I mean, that really have affected both institutions. So what I want to do now is just spend our last couple minutes just kind of bringing you up to speed about, well, we talked about the college, and we know the difficulties the college is going through now. We continue to pray and work hard to see that something else can be born out there at the college that will fit our mission. We've talked about the number of parishes that we've contributed to. We've talked about the way that the precious blood began in the diocese. We talked about the two foundations of Gasper and Francis Desales Brunner. But what about today? What's the Missionaries of the Precious Blood like today? Well, I can tell you that we don't have 500 priests. In 1965, when there were roughly 500 priests, Ed, were you here on college at the time?
No, I was still in high school.
Yeah, okay, still. I thought you were a lot older than that.
Ooh, there went the color.
In 1965, at the college, there was a meeting. There was an assembly, what we call an assembly. So all of the precious blood priests in the country came to the college, and there's a great photo of them all sitting in the field house.
Oh.
Yeah, in the field house, all of their cassocks and crosses.
Oh.
You remember what they used to look like?
Yeah.
At that meeting, that was the conclusion of the process, but there was a 5-year process before that, a decision to break into 3 provinces in the U.S. From 1838 until 1965, there was only one governmental unit of the precious blood in the U.S. It was the American province. In 1965, we divided into 3 provinces. The Cincinnati province, which was by far the largest, with, at the time, at the split, there was probably 350 priests in this province. The Kansas City province had about 100 priests, and the remaining 25, 30 were out in the Pacific province. You also know what happened after 1965. You had a lot of priests and sisters who left the priesthood or left the ministry as sisters. So in hindsight, dividing a province at that time might not have been the best idea, but hindsight's always 20/20. Right now I'm dealing with about 100 priests as provincial director. I can't imagine trying to deal with 500 priests without email and without cell phones. Quite a task. So in 65 we divided. Rensselaer and the Lafayette Diocese is in the Cincinnati province. So everything from Chicago to the East Coast. Currently we have members serving in Chicago, here in Indiana, up in Whiting, Gary, obviously here at St. Augustine's, Trinity, Indianapolis, Father Barry Fisher's at Marian University. In Ohio, we have one person in Detroit, we have a person in Florida, one in Superior, Wisconsin, so scattered around. The Kansas City province has guys in Missouri and Iowa. We also have guys in the Bay Area in California and in Los Angeles. We are a society of apostolic life. And I'm not going to go too far down the weeds in this one. In that, what takes precedence for us is the mission, the ministry. The primary call of a Benedictine monk is to be a good monk. The primary call of a Franciscan friar is to be a good Franciscan friar. So community becomes what's their primary focus. For a society of apostolic life, our community and our spirituality support our work. So imagine a stool with 3 legs. One's community, one's spirituality, and one is ministry. So for us, our ministry is a very important leg. The other 2 are very important too, but the primary one is ministry. That's how Gasper wanted it. That's how our founder wanted it. We don't take vows. So we're not like a Benedictine or a Franciscan, which would take a vow of poverty, a vow of obedience, and a vow. We live them. We are called to live them. But just like a diocesan priest, they don't take those 3 vows either. But Society of Apostolic Life are bound together by what we call a bond of charity. Other apostolic societies of apostolic life would be the Vincentians, Maryknoll, Glen Marys, and other smaller groups, Pines. You guys wouldn't know the Pines. Internationally, nowadays there are 550 missionaries of the precious blood in the world. You have a list there of all the countries that we currently serve in. The largest province, anybody want to guess? The largest province is the Cincinnati province, right where we are now, with about 102. Next would be India, with about 90. Tanzania, with about 80. Italy has 70. And then it goes down from there. Germany has about 25. Total in Latin America, there's about 40. Spain has about 15. So Poland has about 20. So 550 missionaries. I already mentioned spirituality, so I won't touch on that one. I'm just looking at our time. We're at 45 minutes. Just one other thing. Take a look, if you've not seen it yet, that very first link. It's a short 20-minute video on the history and spirituality of our congregation that was made during our bicentennial year in 2015, bicentennial. It's a professionally done history and then interviews about our spirituality. So just click on it and press play. It's in English, Spanish, German. And if you want to see our websites, those are our websites. Any questions? I know this is like a whirlwind.
Yeah.
I mean,
It was good.
you can't include everything.
When the missions to these other countries, do the 3 provinces in the States send missionaries to these other countries?
Yeah.
When they started in like Guatemala, Colombia, Peru, did they go from Rome
No,
to
yes.
there? Or
Yeah, so the way it worked is for Latin America, in 1947, we sent our first missionaries to Chile from
from the States?
the States. And then in 52, we went to Peru, and in the early 80s to Guatemala, and then in the 90s to Colombia, from the States, yeah. In fact, there's Father Tom Him, who's Brother Tim's biological brother, and Father Barry Fisher, and one other were actually students at St. Joe's, and when they graduated, they discerned to go to the foreign missions, and so they did a farewell from Halleck Ballroom, so that on their way to the airplane to go to Chile, because they were going to do their theology studies, their seminary work in Chile, where they were going to be assigned as missionaries. So that's another kind of interesting connection.
Send off the wood to the wheel.
Maybe everybody knows this besides me, but so St. Joseph's ground, is it owned by the Precious Blood?
So the way most Catholic institutions work, hospitals, schools, whatever kind of retreat centers, is there's a board of trustees at the college, and the board of trustees owns the land and the buildings, etc. Above the board of trustees, for most religious orders, is a second board, sometimes called the member board, which has certain reserved powers in terms of appointing a president or changing the mission statement, those kind of things. And so for most religious institutions, let's say the board of trustees of a hospital decides to close the hospital and get out of the hospital business, then that whatever is left of the property would probably revert back to whatever religious order owned it. But that's pretty simplistic. So, just like the diocese owns, the way I understand, the diocese owns the parishes. The bishop actually owns the parishes and the land. Yeah. So there's St. Augustine's, but there's also the diocese.
So you're saying all these foreign missions were actually trained, or they're actually people that came from the States to go there, or did they have seminaries in the...
Well, now they have their own, yeah. Right now in Latin America, now the Americans only sent members to Latin America and Vietnam. So all those other places, Croatia, Tanzania, India, those were started from Europe. So in Latin America now we have maybe 3 North Americans down there still. There's about 38, 40 Latin Americans, and then about 3 North Americans. Father Joe Deerdorf, Father Gage Reiling, Father Bill Buth, that might be it, just 3. Yeah. And they're all, well, Father Buth is 88, Gage Reiling's 90, I think.
my.
And then Joe Deerdorf is a spry 60-something.
Mid-60s.
I wonder about age. Father Ernest Randley served.
Yeah, Father, yeah.
First in Chile and then Peru.
Peru, yeah, for
Or
long, and then Colombia,
Peru and then Colombia.
yeah. Father Randley,
Yeah, he
who was also a philosophy teacher
He
here
was
at
a
college.
philosophy teacher here when he first came. And then at some point, he decided he wanted to be a missionary, and the missionaries of the Precious Blood. Or they needed him there.
Yeah, exactly. The last item I would just add is, for us in the contemporary world, it's not just priests and brothers and sisters. We also have the Precious Blood companions, which are lay associates. So here at St. Augustine's for Betty Tonner, Phyllis, no, I didn't know. Barry Ellen Kralkamp, and Don Kralkamp, the Reicherts, Larry Jennings, Mary Lou Potts, you go down the list. Steiner, Don Steiner. So these lay associates are a way to spread our spirituality and continue to grow the community and support each other. Any final questions? Thank you very much. Oh,
I'll give you one. In 1967, the Kansas City province opened a high school seminary out there. So the year I graduated, no, actually 63 they opened it. 67, their seniors and the seniors from Brunner, Ohio, we all merged here at St. Joe together. And they stirred the pot a little bit to even out the manpower. I was one of the lucky ones. I got drafted, and I was a member of the Kansas City province.
Oh.
Yeah, so there were 2 high school seminaries that, for the Precious Blood, and then the college was the college formation program, before they would go to the theology school, yeah. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks to the diocese for having us be able to give this presentation.
Thank you.
And a happy 75th anniversary to the diocese.
Thank you.